What is going on with the world of social media, LinkedIn, YouTube? We are coming to you live. My name is Ron Eddings. I will be your moderator for this session. But as always, I'm joined by the CEO and co founder, Shashank Tiwari. Shashank, welcome to your live stream.
Good morning. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you for taking time out again, Ron. It's always fun to have you host these, awesome webinars, which we've seen the community, customers, the broader sort of sets of people in this interested space get very excited about. So, super thrilled to be again live with you this morning.
Yeah, and we're talking about something that everyone is super obsessed with. It's artificial intelligence. And when we started planning this session, we were like, hey, we want to talk about how things have shifted. I know that you work with a lot of healthcare organizations, financial institutions like banks, and you're seeing a shift in how they're looking at GRC. I think GRC is one of those manual, sometimes mundane fields, but I think artificial intelligence gives it life again.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you kind of nailed it with that statement of artificial intelligence has given it life again. It's become hip and it's become attractive and interesting, right, from being rather bordering on being mundane and tedious and being looked at as a burden, so which is good. Apart from, of course, efficiencies, there's excitement around it, and excitement is always good with every, I guess, corporate function.
So let's jump right into it. Looking at the healthcare and bank financial institution space, what are some of those use cases that you think are very relevant and timely for applying AI to GRC?
Yeah, this is actually very, interesting and timely for us also to speak about this topic. We've been, as both of us know here, and much of our listeners know, been a little early in this game, right? We started about 2.5 years ago. We have a general availability product. We've had our sort of, platform battle tested by, large corporations, global 100 banks, large entities, public companies kind of, get into it. And so, as we sort of see more and more of these conversations, more of these usage sort of data points, what's exciting for us is that the use cases are also evolving rapidly in a good positive way, right? So when we started out the journey, and especially when we started out the journey in the context of GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, our thesis was that, of course, there is a lot of tedious, mundane, complex activity around staying compliant, and then, of course, making sure your policies, your procedures are in line with the expected regulations and standards, and that's where most of the need and most of the value add would be, which remains an area, which definitely remains an area where large banks, healthcare companies certainly have immense amounts of focus, and they also see the benefits in that space. So that remains, one of the big areas. However, I think what we are seeing is a lot of adjacent use cases become equally important, and in some cases more important. And we'll talk about that in that session today. Of course, we'll dig into many of them at second level detail, just kind of slicing and dicing and seeing what they mean. But at the highest level, you're talking about things like third party risk management. You're talking about privacy management and privacy review. You're looking at control testing. You're looking at business continuity as a important business function, risk assessment, um, and a lot of other things in and around, which are extremely important for the enterprise today. And they, all of them, cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of energy, and yet they are struggling to just barely meet those goals, right, that they've set out for themselves. So in that context, definitely AI seems to be a game changer, and this is coming from our customers. We are learning as much as we're bringing the technology by working with these incredibly smart leaders, across healthcare, across banking.
Right. One of the things that I see all the time for what you post, looking at the branding of Uno is 30x speed, 10x scale. And I would imagine that one of those entry points for working with Uno and even just wanting to look at GRC from an AI lens is accelerating the compliance process. So let's talk about that use case. Like, what are some of the things that go into it? How do organizations start to walk down that path of accelerating the compliance process?
Yeah, this is again fantastic observation, Ron. You have got that eye for picking up, I guess, the interesting nuggets from what we've been saying out there. Um, 30x speed and 10x scale, which of course we have spoken about many times, and you see that also, I guess, almost in all sorts of online presence that we have, right? Whether it's our website, whether it's the LinkedIn media posts, or some of these videos. And the reason why we even started with that, glorious goal, if you may, or the big sort of claim saying 30x speed and 10x scale, was because of two reasons. One, that early on itself, the evidence was very clear from our work that it was possible, right? In many cases, it's not trivial, it's not possible to achieve 30x speed and 10x scale, even if you have an outstanding technology. But in this case, because we are still sitting in a lot of legacy, a lot of tooling, a lot of processes that need to be brought up to the modern times, if you may, I think that scope exists. So, that itself, I think, is something that is encouraging, exciting, especially for the end customers, for the users. And then the second part, which I think is something that got us more confident and got us more bullish on this whole narrative of 30x speed and 10x scale, essentially this quantum jump, if you may, in short, was the fact that our technology was really doing those wonders, right? And we could see that glint in our customers' eyes, in that sort of magic moment where they would end up sort of using it as a part of their POC or taking it for a test drive and coming back super thrilled. It's like, oh my God, I didn't know this was possible. And it became possible primarily because in the world of GRC, there's a lot and lot and lot of unstructured data. And when I mean that, I truly mean it, because we are dealing with documents, we are dealing with images, we're dealing with screenshots, we're dealing with CSV exports, we're dealing with all other kinds of file formats, right? PowerPoint presentations, Visio files, what have you. And typically, most of the automation tools so far, even if they've made some progress, have somehow shoehorned and restricted themselves to the world of structured data, data that is sitting in tables, data that is accessible via APIs, data that is clean, data that can be consumed. And the reality is that that is probably less than 20% of the data that you need to run an effective governance, risk, and compliance program. So now the question becomes, in the eyes of the customer, especially, is like, hey, all this is great, but that solves 20% of my problems. So, even if I become, five times better in 20% of my problem, in the overall scheme of things, I still have very small improvements, right? So there is that, sort of sobering moment for existing, automation technologies. But I think with the AI technologies, and especially with this power of, gathering intelligence out of unstructured, and really sort of using unstructured to our advantage, right? Using unstructured to really drive things with confidence, and building artificial specialized intelligence on top of it. That is what has allowed us, honestly, to even get to that point where we can confidently claim the 30x speed, 10x scale. And in fact, my sense is we'll probably even go further and farther from there, right? We don't want to get ahead of ourselves and claim before we get there, but it's definitely on the horizon, because again, a lot of this chaos, if you may, or even the root cause of a lot of this mundane, tedious activity goes back to data being splattered everywhere, and
Hmm.
existing in shapes, forms, sizes that is not easy to consume, that involves essentially reading reams and reams of document and going through cells of a spreadsheet, or looking through a lot of screenshots, or works like that. So that has, I think, in a nutshell, from our learnings, from our engagements, and from our continuous sort of feedback loop with customers, making us, both informing us but also making us more excited about it. I think, like, that's the good and cool part of this technology, really.
Yeah. So when I was in the incident response space, there would be a lot of vendors that would come to us and say, "Hey, we could shrink your incident response process from days to minutes." And they would come to us and we would be like, "Hey, we actually don't know how long our incident response process takes. We just know that we don't want it to be so manual. We don't want so many steps. But we will still create a baseline after we started working with a vendor. So in your case, looking at someone that hasn't mapped out their policies and how long it takes to do their compliance efforts, what do you typically see, especially in the banking and healthcare space? Like, what is that final output or that final amount of time that it usually takes them to do one specific compliance effort?
Yeah, it's sort of talking about a very fundamental problem sometimes, right? In a human intensive cybersecurity GRC domain, right, where you may not even have a good accurate baseline, right? You may not even have metrics that represent reality. I mean, they will all have metrics. Everybody's got metrics, right? But whether it really matches up with reality, sometimes even a debate within organizations, right? And so, yeah, you are right there that until you sort of baseline that, even figuring out whether you're improving from that or remaining at status quo remains a question that is difficult to answer with confidence, right? So yes, so we attempt to do that. What we typically do is we try to think around the standard business processes, right? And you will see that, again, as we dig deeper today in this session. um, and the business processes really sort of go around various types of use cases. Some are simply straightforward use cases where there is a new regulation or a new standard that the company is trying to align around and get compliant with. Sometimes it's ongoing annual audits and assessments to stay compliant, right? And then there are lots of, I would say, small but extremely critical and sometimes the most painful parts of the process where you have to run assessments on all your vendors, for example, on an ongoing basis, right? Whether you are doing your annual audits with them or whether you're onboarding newer sets of these vendors. There is immense amounts of work around control testing. There is lots and lots of effort around review analysis. So, there wouldn't be one metric that would kind of, be representative of all of them. But typically, what we see is that when you look at complete new compliance, for example, if you're looking at a company that has never done, let's say, ISO ever and wants to do ISO for the first time, they would definitely need months of effort. And when I say months, you're talking about 3 5 months at minimum, sometimes even longer depending on the complexity and scope, right? And
Right.
with larger organizations, large banks, large sort of healthcare companies, usually it runs through the whole year and sometimes even spills over to the next one, right? There's a lot of preparation and then finally sort of doing it. Now when you start taking with regulations or legal requirements that have even more complexity, for example, if you wanted to do a FedRAMP, right, which essentially then in some sense gets you ready to do business with the federal government here in the United States, or if you are trying to get compliant with high trust, which is a very important sort of regulatory standard within the healthcare world, or of course you're trying to check boxes and get ready for PCI compliance, or some of the others like that, the complexity is even higher, right? So those are non-trivial, each one of them. And when I say non trivial, it is non trivial on all counts. It is non trivial in terms of preparation. It needs months of preparation. Many a times, it's non trivial in terms of evidence collection and preparation of policies and procedures and implementation. And it's also non trivial in terms of audits. Usually involves series of audits, right? Internal audits, preparation audits, then the final certification audits. And also it's very expensive. It's very 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 expensive. Like if you were trying to do a FedRAMP compliance, even with medium complexity, and I think most people wouldn't talk about this too much because again it becomes sort of an internal conversation for most companies, but you're looking at total budgets running up to millions of dollars, right? You could easily run up to a few $1 million, a couple of $1 million, simply just getting ready and getting your initial things done in the world of FedRAMP, right? As an example. And again, if it's a large bank, large healthcare, it only becomes bigger, right, from there on. So I think what we see is typically when we get to baseline, we almost baseline it around use cases, right? And there, when we see is we are talking broadly when you look at compliance months or quarters. When it becomes new type of compliance, it typically ends up becoming at least an ongoing substantial amount, like 50% plus of the team's work when it goes to ongoing assessments, third party risk. And sometimes there's also metrics that we have seen that our customers measure, which is more from an end goal standpoint. For example, one of the metrics I've heard a couple of companies we have been engaging with is that they look at the amount of delay or the amount of time it takes to onboard a new vendor as a representative metric of their own checks and balances around third party risk management. So if they're backed up by 3 months to onboard a new vendor, they know that they're taking on an average 90 to 100 days simply to do their review, basic review, to even start doing business with the vendor. And this, by the way, does not include the procurement process, right? This is purely cyber technology risk assessment that is being done for this new vendor. So that for them is a direct business impact. And if we can crunch that down to weeks and days like we can, that itself is money, right, on the table. So I think like those kinds of metrics have become more representative of the individual business processes. And those are the metrics, I think, where I see the end customers also sort of appreciate and understand, right? Less than saying, hey, I'm becoming 30% more efficient, or I'm doing 10 times faster. I think the metrics that represent money, I would say, or that represent costs, I think those are the ones that ultimately become the nice ones to measure as you start looking at the benefits, if you may, of the 30x speed and the 10x scale.
So we had some visuals that we are going to bring up. So let's go ahead and bring those up on the screen now, and let's work through it because I think there's other use cases that we could glean in and kind of get some insights on.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, if you start looking at all these use cases, it all sort of stem from, again, the fundamental, very foundational thesis that today we are spending immense amounts of time, energy, money in doing things manually, or doing things in a way that is part manual, part workflow driven, extremely cumbersome, tedious, expensive, right? And the goal right from the beginning for us has been to move the needle in the direction of strategic, move the needle in the direction of more value, right? Therefore, every use case that we have approached, this has kind of become like the guiding light, if you may, right? So you can just sort of think of that as in the back of your mind. Um, and as we go through the use cases, right, and I think that we could probably get to that part, right, where we have the various sort of pieces of the puzzle, right, within our use case umbrella, where we are looking at third party risk and control testing. And maybe we can click through to the next one, I would think. It would become, yeah, and maybe we can zoom in a tiny bit, just to sort of sit on it on for just a few seconds. I think this would set a good context. So, what this picture, of course, does, and we have a version of this picture also on our website and other places. So, for those who are listening, you can certainly get hold of it, and we're happy to share this, and the recording will be available too. But if you really think about this, you can almost think of the use cases in sort of four buckets, right, or four types of use cases. Now, of course, when I say four types, they're not just four types. They're probably double digit type of use cases when you start getting into more fine grained view of what these are, right? But at the highest level, there is the broader concern around policy and content management, right? You are going to get compliant with a certain standard or a certain regulatory requirement, and it all starts by you defining how you'll approach it, right? And that manifests in the form of your policies, in the form of your standard operating procedures, in the form of identifying the controls and the scope of those controls. And from there, of course, you go implement them, and you sort of audit yourself and assess yourself basis those sort of primary expectations and primary scope that you have defined. Now, even in that effort around creating policies or creating standard operating procedures, managing versions of policies year after year, assessing the controls, defining the scope, all of that itself, right from the beginning, is very tedious, very cumbersome, right? And so, there, what we do is we indulge in hyper automation. We start by saying, well, you can just upload your existing policies. And if you've got none, well, the system will write it for you. If there are gaps, the system will find it, identify it, and author it, right? If there are versions that have changed over a period of time, the system will understand, match it against your expectations, and tell you whether your overall risk posture is getting better or getting worse, what the gaps may be, how to remediate it, right? So there's a lot of that gets automated out, and we see a lot of use cases around it. The flip side of it, which you kind of look up, if you may, the very first one around audits and assessments, you would see is kind of like the twin of that policy and controls management or the compliance expectations. And why is that the case? Because all audits, all assessments in some sense align with what you have chosen to become compliant with, right? The expectations that you are trying to adhere to is what you've got to meet. And of course, some of these emerge from your own internal practices, and some of them, of course, will come from the requirements of the regulator. But that's what you indulge in. And then the side ones, if you may, if you look into these, those are the processes, like I was saying, extremely critical for business, come in small packets. The intensity depends a little bit on your business as well. For example, for healthcare, privacy is absolutely important, right? So for them, they need to spend immense amounts of time, energy, money, making sure not only are they compliant with dealing with PII data, and if you're healthcare in the United States, of course, EPHI data or healthcare data, but you also want to make sure that all your partners, every associate who is touching your data, also is compliant with it. So now you've also got responsibility to make sure that your ecosystem is compliant with the privacy regulations, right? And so you have to indulge in a lot of this DPA reviews and
Yep.
BA reviews and privacy terms and condition reviews, and you gap analysis around it and expect your vendors to be compliant with it, right? And the same thing kind of also transcends to anybody who is doing other types of personal data or confidential data. You could argue a credit card issuer has similar requirements, right? As an example. Then, of course, there are on the other side of third party risk that we already spoke about. Um, and then, last but not the least, less talked about in the GRC realm, but extremely critical for especially the banking world, but I guess it applies really to anybody and every large organization, is true risk assessment, right? Where you now start looking at business continuity, risk assessment. You are doing control testing on an ongoing basis to make sure that what I'm claiming is actually what I do, right? And what I do is actually aligning with what I'm claiming, right? So I think there's a lot of that also becomes very relevant. And it segues also into areas that is perhaps not even written on this slide, but we are seeing a lot of use cases around, which is the broader area of regulatory reporting, right? So there's also a massive amount of pressure, massive amount of demands, especially in the banking, financial services, insurance, and that larger sector, where there is a lot of responsibility in terms of regulatory reporting, right? Some things we talk about the highest level, like the 10Ks and the 8K level reporting, but also lots of additional reporting that is sort of mandated by standards bodies, mandated by the state in many cases, and in many cases expected by the shareholders and expected by the governing councils. So this is where the complexity comes in, and these are the pieces we kind of address to.
We have that expectation. I mean, we all use banks, we all use healthcare providers. If we go to them and we find out that they're not following state, national compliance standards, or their partners aren't, we're going to be mad. Not a little mad, big mad. And so I think that this is definitely, right on par with like making sure you just have your ducks in a row. When it comes to GRC, I would imagine that GRC analysts and leaders of GRC, even CISOs, are constantly looking for better ways to do things. But I would be a little surprised if they were going into Google and typing, all right, AI GRC. So, how are you typically introducing this to the audience, and how are they finding out about it?
Yeah, that's a good observation again. I think that there are a couple of sort of, I would call it tailwinds, right, which is definitely helping our conversation and also getting our customers ready, right? And it's very important because there can be interesting technologies, there can be interesting methodologies, right, that can make substantial impact on anything. Forget GRC, right? Like any business process or any outcome, but the users of that business process or the owners of that particular responsibility need to also be ready for it, right? And if they're not ready for it, however cool and however powerful the technology is, it's not going to really see the light of the day or provide the benefits that it's claiming that it does, right? And so I
Yeah.
think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? Like ultimately, it's the buyer champion, the sort of users, the sponsors of those pieces, or the leaders driving these initiatives. They have to be excited around it as well, and they have to be ready
Yep.
for it. What we are seeing is we are seeing two tailwinds, as I mentioned, right? So one is because of macro environment, and that macro environment is forcing a lot of cyber leaders, CIOs, CISOs, GRC heads to rethink how they could drive efficiency yet comply with higher standards, right? And so this is happening because of multiple reasons. We'll skip, at least in this session, of what those multiple reasons are, but I think most of us are keeping our eyes and ears open on it. It's the economy, it's the sort of upping of expectations from regulators, rapid digital transformation, all those things, right? There's all kind of adding together, if you may, and leading towards this push for each of these leaders to do more with less, right? Or rather, do more with more effectiveness with less, right? And so now the
Mhm.
question becomes in their mind is like, what tools do I have? What methodologies do I have to really achieve that goal, right? So that is something that they definitely have it as a part of their own agenda, as a part of their own initiative. And I think AI, in that sense, is certainly become front and center because they are hopeful. They're excited about the power of AI, and they're saying, well, let's see if this can really do what it's claiming it can do. Now, of course, at these points, with this tailwind, if we don't deliver to promise, it could also possibly go in the wrong direction, where there is too much hype and the gap between hype and reality is too wide, right, for them to take advantage of. But in this particular case, as we approach and show them proof points, I think that tailwinds translates into real adoption, right? So that's one piece that we see. The second part that I think is sort of the cousin of that, if you may, is the broader push from within teams. And it's surprising a little bit because teams like GRC teams, legal teams, procurement teams, I would say even employee engagement, HR teams, finance teams, these typically are not the ones standing in the front of the line to adopt newer technology, right?
Right.
Like those are usually the um, sort of, I would say, wheelhouse of those who are already tinkering with technology, right? Like that engineering team, that DevOps team, those are
Yep.
the guys who want to stand front and center in the line of anything, the new shiny tool that is in town, right? Not these folks, the other ones that I just listed, because they run business critical processes, and not that the others don't, but they're also a little bit by design because they have to be compliant, they have to make sure like things aren't disrupted, are a little hesitant, right? However, having said that, I think that the modern AI movement, in a way, has also gotten all of these folks super thrilled and super excited. And the reason they are super thrilled and super excited, and this is how I kind of learn with every customer conversation, every implementation, is that prior technologies promised only about 5-10% improvement at the end of the day. And so when they weighed that in a practical manner, they felt like there's higher risk. I have to spend substantial amounts of dollars and enablement to take advantage of these improvements. And then the improvement is good and nice and appreciated, but not game changing.
Hmm.
Right. So, like, that's how they would think. And so they would say, well, hold off. Right. We don't need to jump onto this. Let it mature some more and we'll get to it eventually. And that is what has led also to a lot of legacy in all these different sort of user base. However, with AI, that equation is becoming different because now they're saying, well, wait, this is not a small change, this is a massive change. What I can accomplish with 100 people team today, I might be able to do with 15 people team. What I was able to do in 15 man months, I might be able to crunch it down to 2 weeks. There are parts of the processes that I always guessed because it was just unsurmountable and absolutely impossible to even do because of the unstructured data and all the mess. Well, looks like I can actually do it today, right? Things that I relied on sampling and good faith, I don't have to do that anymore. I can actually look through everything in the small amount of time and resources I have and do a thorough job. So, these kinds of sort of very massive, very big quantum level, sort of possibilities, it's what's sort of getting them excited and getting them on this sort of the same page. And so those two tailwinds, right, I think realistically is what is changing their mind, getting them ready. And going back to your original point, without the customers being ready, every interesting technology can just remain shelfware, right?
Yeah.
It will never see real usage. But in this case, we are excited. We are super thrilled that the customers are ready, they are excited, and they are the ones sometimes who are also driving it further and farther by showing their enthusiasm, and also by pushing us even further, saying, hey, this technology is fantastic, it can do A, B, and C, but it looks like you could also do D, E, and F, and we are here for you. So I think it's good stuff. It's very encouraging.
Yeah, it's a good point that, these types of organizations typically like to have a tried and true method. And you actually provided us with an image that goes over the manual process. So let's pull that up and walk us through kind of some of those steps that come out when a new regulation comes to play.
Yeah, so typically when a new regulation comes out, let's just say the EU AI Act, which is now fresh off the oven, right? Then there are a few more which are still sort of getting baked and getting ready to be dished out, right? Like the things like DORA and things like some of the privacy
Yeah.
regulations across the states. Usually for GRC folks, and I think for any compliance, any risk manager of any form, the first sort of effort or the first step is to try and understand it. What exactly is this thing, right? What do I need to do? What is the scope of this new expectation or new regulation? And usually, to get to that basic question of what is the scope, what do I need to do, it involves a lot of reading and parsing and understanding that content, right? And that content usually is dense, legalist type content, right? So it's not something that you can do as a part of your bedtime reading, on your weekend and come out ready on Monday morning with it, right? It usually will involve days and days of meticulous annotating it, figuring out what are the relevant portions, trying to understand the nuance of those words, right? Like there's a lot of that work that goes on. Usually those parts are very manual. Either internal teams do it themselves, or sometimes they involve external consultants who are experts in that domain, and they do it collaboratively with them. But nonetheless, it involves a lot of that understanding of the expectation.
Right.
And once that happens, you start getting into the phase of figuring out, well, okay, now I understand what I need to do. How ready am I already? Based on what I already do, what are my gaps? What are the new things I need to bring in? Right? How do I map against my existing policies, existing procedures? So by the time you get to it, even to the point of understanding, scoping, analyzing, and then mapping of policies, you're already talking about weeks and months, right? Weeks and months of preparation, substantial amounts of costs, substantial amounts of time, and of course, lots of people, right? Lots of, man hours and man months into it. Now, once you get to that point, is where you start doing real work, the implementation, the review, and then you close the loop and get attested, if that's what the end goal is, or get certified. In the world of AI, what we are seeing, especially with Uno, is that it's really changing the game in a drastic way. What it's doing is it's saying, okay, you've got these first pieces of the puzzle, which are the most tedious, most time consuming, and also are something that is not fun. You're not really looking forward to reading that 600-page document. Well, let AI do the work for you. How about that? Let's flip the story. You simply upload the documents, go get your lunch, come back, and AI has done most of the work for you first round, and we'll keep doing more on it. And then you flip from the role of a doer to a reviewer. So now you're not reading through 600 pages of content. You're not spending weeks trying to find meaning out of it. But the AI engine, Uno, has done that work for you. Now you review it, you look at it, and then you figure out, does it match what you need? Do you need to tweak it some further and want some additional pieces? And now you accelerate that, and so this is one of those where you definitely see even more than 30x speed, right? And substantial amounts of scale, right? And so now you are ready and you can compress it down. You avoid manual errors. One of the customers, one of the CISOs that we work with, he mentioned once, he said, TPRM reviews, which is a slightly different case that we'll talk about in a short bit. These ones involve, again, reading these tons of documents, the trust center downloads that are sent our way. Depending on the day of the week, depending on the time of the day, the accuracy can vary. Monday morning, everyone's happy, charged. We see some really good, fine reviews out of it. Friday afternoon after lunch, really everyone is trying to just wrap that up. Nobody's interested in reading
Yeah.
the 120-page SOC 2 report. That's not what they dreamed up of, right? So there's also that human variance and human variability. I think not only do you compress speed and get the efficiency, you also get rid of the human variability, right? With an engine like Uno. So you have consistency, you have speed, and you have efficiency, right? So this is one of the things that happens in a system like this.
So you mentioned third party risk management. So let's go ahead and jump into that. We have another image for it.
Yeah, so this is actually a tiny sliver, small screenshot from the tool, and of course, listeners, I would encourage, give it a spin. Tell us if this is your pain point and you're dying under the burden of sort of delayed onboarding of vendors and quick assessments. And we'd love to, of course, show this to you and get this in your hands. Now, what happens in the world of Uno, as we have sort of taken our broader theme of hyper automation, is that we say, okay, you take all the documents that your vendors are providing you, right? And usually, what are these documents? They would provide you with the responses to the big, long list of questionnaires that you've sent their way. That could be one. um, you may ask them to submit their compliance reports, right? So you could say, hey, give me your ISO report, or send me your SOC 2 type 2 report, or some others, right? Or send me some policy elements, because I'm interested in knowing how you manage data privacy and how you do data encryption, and so on and so forth. So you get all these documents, right, in various shapes, forms, sizes, responses to questions, large PDFs, exports from Word docs, what have you, right? So you've received all of these. Now, in today's environment, what has also happened, which is sort of interesting, is companies themselves, because they get asked, vendors, I mean, themselves, because they get asked from one customer to the other, they have collated everything into a packet,
Hmm.
right? And usually they are hanging out in some sort of a trust center. So the moment a customer says, I want this, and this, they're saying, well, be my guest. I'll give you everything and some more. So they download the whole trust center or give them access. Sometimes it's online access directly. And they just send the whole bunch of unstructured documents the customer's way and say, okay, go ahead, review it. And if you see any issues out there, we are here to respond to it. But what has really happened is the burden has shifted back on the customers. Like, okay, now I got to read a few hundred pages of documents, read responses to all the 300 questions that I sent across to them, and, look at every other certification or evidence of policy that I asked for. And that is time consuming. And it goes back through, not to repeat here, but, the same mundane, tedious, time consuming, inefficiency, accuracy issues, right? And so what Uno does is Uno takes a very simple view. It says, okay, let's consume it. Just upload all of this, right? Or basically bring in all those unstructured data sets into Uno. And then give us a little bit of, just a little hint of what you want to do with it. Do you want us to, we can do a few things out of the box, but do you want us to identify all the risks? Do you want us to also show you some of the highlights of, what these documents are saying? Do you want us to create some summaries? And let's do it for you. And then what Uno ends up doing is it essentially reads through, parses, classifies, categorizes, does risk assessments, maps it back to controls, maps it back to the regulations it's claiming to be compliant with, and essentially auto generates reports, right? It'll auto generate very reliable, detailed reports which show you a percentage coverage, which you can also sort of dynamically filter down and see along each sort of domains or each context areas, which is usually how it is being assessed, right, by third party auditors. It'll give you an analysis, basis what it has read against a control. It'll tell you, hey, this is what this company is doing. And when it says that, one of the questions that comes up, which is also sort of goes hand in hand with the excitement. Is like, hey, how can I rely on this? Is it reliable, or is this something the AI system made up? Because as we all know, a lot of the public AI systems like ChatGPT, etc., also suffer from massive amounts of hallucination, right? They make up things.
Hmm.
So then the question for enterprises is like, hey, wait. This sounds nice. This is great. Yes, I love it. But how do I make sure that I can rely on it? What if, Uno just made up something and told me something that wasn't true? Well, we take that question head on, right? So therefore, you'll see citations and references for every single analysis that Uno does, which in the case of third party risk ends up becoming, well, here is what the third party is doing, here are where the risks are. And you know what? Hold on. We are saying this because this fragment of the document, or this paragraph, or this slide, or this image is saying so, right? And those are right there in line, and you can access them, and you can go right to that point, and you can see it why the system is saying what it's saying. So it's very, very magical in that sense. It's I would say very detail oriented as well, right? This analysis.
Yeah, this is one of the first features that I saw of the product, and I was really impressed because I'm not a legal expert, and many other people in cybersecurity are not legal experts. So when you get this type of information, you really want to make sure that your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, because, like you're saying, there's health. These are we're specifically talking about healthcare and financial institutions, like very sensitive matters. You want to make sure that there's that complete overlap, or that you have some more information from your provider. And what I think is most striking about this set of capabilities in your product is there's whole categories that do just this one piece now. Like there's a lot of third party risk management security providers.
It's true, it's true, and I think that's both exciting, and I think it sort of speaks to the power of the platform, the way we have approached it. And it's also, I think interesting in terms of how the customer perceives it, right? And how the customer could take advantage of it. So I think you're absolutely right. Each of these, for that matter, third party risk management, answering questionnaires or assessments, doing audit preps, getting you compliant with some piece of regulation, doing some of the business continuity, each one of them, you are absolutely right. Sometimes there are a whole set of companies, like there's an entire company just doing that. Now, what we ended up doing was we ended up building our platform in a manner where it was very much built like, a set of very powerful Lego blocks, if you may, were constructed first, right? So that's why we have this very powerful language model, which is very nuanced and context aware, which can read, all these different types of unstructured data and make sense out of it. There is the generator models, if you may, which is around the large language models with, of course, domain trained specificity. So it does a lot of things that, it can enable, it can generate content, it can classify, it can do a few things. And then we combine that with few others, things like knowledge graph, which provides the organizational context, because ultimately, generic stuff is generic, but, each of these enterprises have their own respective customization and story. And then last but not the least, kind of bringing together of all these different techniques, right, along with few other, sort of call them scalability centric, sort of methodologies. So when you start looking at that, whenever you build like a powerful set of Lego blocks, it becomes really, uh, a sort of exercise in imagination, and exercise in where you could take it, right,
Hmm.
and where customers could also drive it in terms of possibilities, right? And that is basically what is happening here, because we didn't even conceive of all these feature sets from day zero, right? Because those Lego blocks were available, we created, let's say, three interesting things or Lego manifestations, right? Like here you can get compliant quickly, here you can run third party risk, right? We went to our customers, and when they saw that power, it's like, oh, that's great. Well, can you not review my contractual obligations as well? And it was easy to bring that together, purely because the building blocks were there, right? In some cases, it also jumped to saying, well, you can draw data out of images, which is outstanding. By the way, we didn't touch upon that today, but we have this incredible technology where you can give it an image, which means a workflow. You can give it a diagram of a particular system flow, or you could give it a screenshot, and it's able to pull meaning out of that as well, right? Not just text. So when somebody saw that, right, one of our early customers, they said, well, you know what, we have so many screenshots out here that team members are sitting down looking through it, classifying it against various pieces of evidence as a part of our audit prep. Can you not use that powerful Lego block, if you may, or the powerful technology to also offer that up as a part of your automatic classification? And that was trivial, that was straightforward, right? So things like those, the Lego block approach has really helped us, and we continue to invest in that. We continue to make more powerful Lego blocks, as much as finding ways of assimilating that and figuring out how to make Eiffel Towers and Tower of London and what have you, right, out of those. So there's one of that's going on. The other piece, I think, is that if you look at the broader market, I think this is goes back to the earlier point of the macro conditions and CISO's preparedness. There seems to be a little bit of a desire to move towards a more consolidated, holistic, platform centric view. Now, I'm not trying to again make this platform versus point solution debate, which has, I guess, become a very common point of confusion and common point of discussion across the cybersecurity sector. But I think what I'm definitely seeing in the market is that having too many of these point solutions for doing one small task is definitely causing friction, is definitely causing a lot of overhead. So when end customers, CISOs, are seeing platforms and tool sets which, at least within certain bounds, is able to do a lot of adjacent things, uh, it's being well received. It's being received with enthusiasm, and it's also providing them the economies of scale, providing them the interesting value, if you may, like, which is what everybody wants out of these platforms and tools.
So you mentioned Legos. I want to stick to that theme for just a second. We have GRC teams focus on healthcare, focus on banking. What is their Millennium Falcon when it comes to like combining different things together to ultimately like get something really cool that they're proud of?
Yeah, it's very cool. I love the analogy. So, see, for a lot of these GRC teams, they are becoming more and more front and center, right? And they're becoming front and center because of, again, a few broader conditions, right? Like one of them being the fact that GRC itself is becoming more important, right? Compliance expectations are increasing, right? And so obviously they've got to step up to that, expectation and challenge. The second piece is that for the longest part, a lot of these compliance efforts were more of a checkbox effort in the beginning, right? Where the idea was, okay, as far as I've done it once, it's fine. I can move on and keep doing my business as usual. Now, with increased regulatory reporting, with a lot more cyber threats and hacks on the other side of the puzzle, with broader increase of risks, I think people are beginning to, and when I say people, it's regulators, customers, companies, boards, they are beginning to come back to these GRC folks and said, well, if we are compliant with so and so, if we did have our controls in place, if we did have our processes which were well tested, how is it that we are unable to up our game at a more broader level, right? And so this is where I think I mentioned a little earlier was, what we say is what we do, and what we do is what we say, right? Like, as simple as it sounds, sometimes in large enterprises that simple piece itself is very difficult. So I think this is where the teams are aspiring to bridge that gap, and the only way they can bridge that gap is not by brute forcing, but by building this powerful, intelligent, sort of methodology and platform that can automate that out for them. And I think, like, they've got a real shot at it, with
Hmm.
AI and with a platform like Uno. So that those are also one of those, I would say, a little bit more forward looking, and you would see that again in some of the more forward looking healthcare companies and forward looking banks and fintech companies. And also, not to just restrict to those. I mean, we are today talking about a lot of those use cases, but it's happening across board. Public companies which are listed have similar expectations. Companies even in the commerce segment, online commerce or industrial, or folks who are working on critical infrastructure, working with the government, have similar expectations, because they're also dealing with same sorts of challenges, same sorts of expectations, right? Privacy on one side, security controls on the other, visibility and transparency, on the third
Hmm.
axis. So I think in order to achieve all of that, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to really sort of live true to the fact of, we do what we say, and we say what we do. And yes, if whenever you want it in real time, you can come and assess it, and we are happy to give you on demand, right? Which is not true today, but that's where they all want to go.
Yeah. We all want that Millennium Falcon. And I think if we can't have that, what we want is an expert system. When you think about something like Chat GPT, a GPT as a whole, like any of these general purpose models, they have the hallucinations like you were mentioning. And in the enterprise, we don't want hallucinations. We want tried and true that's going to be repeatable, that will always work. And some of the AI systems that I've been using, they may hallucinate, but they're very unlikely. And I think that's where this term ASI comes into play, artificial specialized intelligence. And I know that's one of your core pillars of the product of for today is really focusing on that specialized intelligence. So go ahead and break this piece down for us.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It all stems from the fact of it being hallucination free, if you may. I think with enterprise software, and especially with critical processes like you just mentioned or spoke to, the tolerance for hallucination, the tolerance for error, or tolerance for made up stuff is extremely low, right? And for good reasons, because the cost of that is extremely high, right? And then it's not even cost in terms of a mistake, it's something that impacts the fundamentals of trust. Just think of
Hmm.
it that way, right? You reach out to a lawyer fully expecting that the lawyer is going to give you pertinent and meaningful advice. But if the lawyer gave you something that turned out to be completely, ineffective and inappropriate and, not even relevant, unlikely you're going to call that person back, right? And so I think it kind of is like that. The expectation is like that. And so what we have done is, I was saying a little bit earlier, is we have, in a very focused, deliberate way, use the power of the technology. And I don't want to diminish that, in the sense that a lot of good work has been done in the open with these public pieces like, GPT technology, a lot of things around RAG that, the open
Oh
source
yeah.
community and individuals have contributed to, a ton of techniques around fine tuning or making things domain specific. And then, of course, lots of other adjacent techniques, from knowledge graph to, various other pieces that is being talked around. What we did was we took some of those as foundational pieces. So we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. There's absolutely no sense in trying to reinvent some of those wheels. But what we did was we said, well, we certainly need to bring in something that can become organization sensitive, right? And what it means is we should have the ability to deal with all this unstructured information at the same level of nuance, at the same level of context as an expert in that company does. And so we build models around that, right? We fine tuned around that. We have completely new innovations around that. Second thing that we did, going back to our original point, there's very little tolerance for hallucination, very little tolerance for errors like those. So
Hmm.
we put all kinds of checks, balances, fine tuning, supplemental models to make sure that those were completely avoided, to a point that it's not even something that is of concern, right? So we definitely invested heavily in that, have innovated heavily with that in mind. And you're absolutely right, that's where the specialized intelligence comes in. Why is that so? Because obviously, when you start getting more and more specific, when you start getting more and more nuanced, there's a trade off, right? Because you can do some things really well, but at the same time, it is not, a general purpose chat GPT anymore either, right? So it is very good GRC expert, does a lot of things in the adjacent areas, but it's not something, that is, uh, doing all kinds of other stuff. In the sense, Uno will not help you create movies, if you wanted to generate those videos. But yes, it will get your GRC task done really well. And to top it all up, I think another aspect of this is the security for AI. So especially for large enterprises, right, but running critical processes, when you look at healthcare and banking, which is a topic of this morning, but also broadly at large, the others we mentioned, the last thing you want is this new powerful tool comes in town and then it actually increases risk because it has its own threat vectors and it has its own problems, right? And so I think one of the biggest pieces is to try to minimize that threat surface substantially. And one assurance that we do, which is very unique, by the way, there's rarely any vendor, I have not seen one so far, where we can also have private deployments. Our entire stack can run privately for a large enterprise. It can even run on prem if you have the right underlying pieces, the right GPUs, and the right compute and storage infrastructure. So that is also something that supplements it, that sort of completes the story, if you may.
So we covered a lot of ground on this stream, and it would only be right if we spoke about how people could stay up to date with what you're doing at Uno and the company as a whole, and get started with transforming manual workflows to AI GRC workflows. So, what is the best way for people to stay up to date and learn more about Uno?
Well, there are two venues where we encourage everyone to come stop by first and check it out. Definitely find us on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn page, and many of us are trying to share all the good work we are doing right there. So do follow us there. Come there, interact with us there, bring your questions on. You can also, of course, ping me directly. You will find me also from that page. I'm very happy to engage, answer all questions, and be of help. The second one is, of course, our website, right? So uno.ai, we try to keep it as updated as possible, but the pace at which we are evolving and innovating, sometimes, by the end of the week, we are already a little outdated and we have more updates to do. So we'll make every effort to keep it up to date, and you'll see a lot more updates come through, including perhaps links to some of this good content, right? Good discussions.
Mhm.
Um, but certainly, yes, go bookmark that as well. Check us out on our website. And then last but not the least, if you are one of those who, after say listening to a discussion like this, feels intrigued and says, well, that you know is quite interesting and I want to get my hands on it. Or even if you are the other side where you feel like this sounds too good to be true, I got to really feel it before I can decide. Either case, we encourage you to get in touch. We'll be very happy to run you through a trial or a POC or whatever that is appropriate for your needs, and get it in your hands, right? Like, we are perfect believers of that motto of seeing is believing, doing is believing. So absolutely, you don't have to necessarily uh, vicariously believe basis what we are saying, but be the person who can get your hands on it and take advantage of it and have fun with it, and also give us feedback. Like I said, we've got the Lego blocks, and you might find us build the next interesting contraption out of it, or the next interesting abstraction out of it.
That's the way to go. You heard it best. Follow the LinkedIn, check out the website, join the waitlist, learn more from Shashank. Shashank, it's always a pleasure to do these with you. Really appreciate you trusting us to be the moderator. And we have more live streams. We're actually be going live again next week, dropping more information, more good nuggets for you all. And with that, we will see everyone next time.
Fantastic. Thank you.